culture passions. Most of us have one. I have had many since I was but a child. Star Trek, Star Wars, DC, Marvel, Doctor Who, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Walden Universe, Tokusatsu, Saturday morning cartoons, Studio Ghibli, 80s New Wave, K-pop, and so much more. These are the things that keep me sane in this world, and I invite those that I am fond of, who share some of these pleasures, to discuss them with me. For I am the Savage Chuck, and this is the Boxing Glove Arrow Podcast!
Back in 1940, 8 sensational heroes united to create the world's very first superhero team, the Justice Society of America. Now, 85 years later, we're gathering podcasters and bloggers from around the globe for a month-long celebration in an event we're calling JS April. Throughout April 2025, join dozens and dozens of podcasters and bloggers as they each share their own unique tributes to the original and greatest superhero team. Get ready for an all-star month of beloved characters, fascinating insights, and incredible stories. Follow the action on social media with the hashtag JSApril, and visit our website for a complete list of participating podcasters, bloggers, and what they're each covering at fireandwaterpodcast.com/JSApril.
Welcome to Boxing Glove Arrow Podcast. This is Chuck Lord, your host, and today we're going to be having a discussion about the Justice Society of America, because Shagg Matthews of the Fire and Water Podcast Network has something they call JS April, and I gathered some friends of mine together to talk about their memories and first encounters with the Justice Society of America. And my guests today are Derek McCaw of one of my favorite podcasts that's been around for a while, the Fanboy Planet podcast. Hello, Derek.
Hello, Chuck. Nice to be here. Yeah, you can find all those old podcasts at fanboyplanet.com, as well as at what I do now, which is largely YouTube interviews and reviews and so forth, but they're all on fanboyplanet.com.
And my second guest is Keith Howell, who's an incredible illustrator and is pretty much in charge of publishing at Meteor House Publishing House, Meteor House, which is devoted mostly to the works of Hugo-winning author Philip Jose Farmer. Hey, Keith.
Hey, it's great to be here. And yep, Meteor House Press is where I do the vast majority of my freelance work. Otherwise, I'm a high school art and electives teacher.
And my third guest is a very prolific author named Frank Schilderner, who's I think you've had stuff published in pretty much most of the new pulp movement, including Meteor House.
Yes,
and there one. Who's the one you actually have your own imprint with?
Pro Se
Plus, yeah, Pro Se Press, yeah. One of my favorite books that you wrote was your Frankenstein series.
Yeah.
With Black Coat Press, that was.
Yes.
One of us.
He's so prolific, it would take me a million years to read all of his books. Okay, so down to business. Derek, yeah, for people that don't know, we had already gone through some of this before and did press forward.
No one needed to know. It's all right.
Well,
yeah, we would have done
getting a little kayfabe here.
All cards are on the table. I don't have the cards, but the cards are on the table. Okay, that was.
You don't have the cards. I have the cards.
Okay. So, Derek, what is your first memory of the Justice Society of America? Justice Society of America.
The JSA, Slurpee cups, because it had a little bio on the back. So it had Dr. Fate, Dr. Midnight, and Starman. I think there was a Wildcat and Vigilante. I know he's not technically JSA, but there were a lot of Golden Age characters on those Slurpee cups, and they had little bios in the back, and they would mention that they were in the JSA. And so then a couple months after that, Justice League of America number 110, back when it was a 100-page super spectacular, and they would reprint full-on Justice Society epics. The issue, if people want to look for it, was the Man Who Murdered Santa Claus. It was Superman and Batman over a dead Santa Claus face down in the snow, but underneath was the Justice Society of America's war against street gangs. So it was an homage to, I think, like White Heat and all that, and the Bowery Boys and all that from, I don't know, 44, I think. But I was hooked because that also had this center spread, which was a Murphy Anderson piece that had all the Justice Society. Who's this Adam that looks nothing like Ray Palmer? Who is this, this Dick Grayson, this Robin who looks more like Batman than Robin? And then a whole bunch of other characters. And I'd had the Jules Pfeiffer book, The Great Comic Book Heroes. My parents had given that to me for Christmas the year before. So I'd seen some of the Golden Age characters. I'd seen the Flash's origin and Alan Scott. But they became my favorite almost immediately. I mean, it's kind of a war between them and the Legion of Superheroes. But I admit I was a weird kid in that I loved knowing the heroes that nobody else knew. And, because everybody knew Super Friends, but, my favorite Super Friends episode, and I would wait for every repeat, was for Plastic Man, the one episode that Plastic Man shows up in. And I was so excited. I loved Plastic Man. And nobody knew who Plastic Man was at that time. It hadn't had an animated series. And so the Justice Society was the same way. They're like some of the characters, but they're not the characters that everybody else on the playground knew. And so I have all the down out of sight, for those who can't see me, bookcase full of the archive editions of all the All-Star reprints, because I had to have those as soon as they came out, and all the crossovers. My God, love those Justice League, Justice Society crossovers. Favorite comics of the year, every year.
Just as a point, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Earth 2 podcast. It's a podcast done by two guys in Scotland. Peter Watson and David Steele, and they have been doing, their whole podcast is centered around the history of the multiple Earths in the DC universe. Starting, I think they started off with like a Wonder Woman, a Golden Age Wonder Woman story where she meets a Wonder Woman from a parallel Earth, and they're trying to do all the different dimensions. Anytime Superboy went to another planet that had a Superboy that was backwards or something, but they do full dramatizations where they read the entire comic all the way through. And after a while, when they decided, whenever they did a JSA JLA crossover, they would do a full cast, and they invited friends to do voices. And we actually did even though the Justice Society were in it, they decided to do a Christmas episode. So we did a full cast audio recording of the Who Murdered Santa Claus issue that you were talking about.
Oh man, that's cool.
And I always play Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow. Yeah. The white bearded, liberal, loudmouth, obnoxious guy. I don't know why I play that part, but okay. Keith, what is your memory of the Justice Society of America?
Like many kids my generation, my earliest exposure to superheroes was the Batman TV show. So I was at least aware of superheroes when I was like 3-4 years old. That way, and I had an older brother, the occasional comic book here or there, mostly just Superman stuff. But at very specific time in my life, basically from about 1973 to 76, my dad was stationed in Puerto Rico at Ramey Air Force Base, and so that's where I was as well. And the way comic books sort of came in there was kind of funny, not very predictable, not very reliable at that time. Marvel Comics, basically, I had to go off base. I had to ride my bike off base and go to this open air shop and go inside where they would have all the new comic books just thrown on this table that had a lip around it, and you just kind of dig around in there. And in terms of like Marvel, I don't know what the difference was between Marvel and DC shipping, but they had a lot more DC than Marvel. Marvel stuff, you basically was limited to Spider-Man, Marvel Tales, Marvel Team Up. That was it. But DC stuff, we had all kinds of DC stuff coming. And so to get a hold of a Justice League comic book was great because you got a whole lot of superheroes for the same quarter, right? But so prior to that point, what I had seen, I remember, in terms of a memory of the JSA, my first exposure was the advertisement in the back of some older comic book that had that issue of Justice League that had the crossover with the grown Robin, who has the Batman outfit on, but he has the Robin mask, and he has the emblem with the bat emblem with the R on it, and that cover really captured my imagination at that time. And so fast forward, then a couple more years there, we're in Puerto Rico. We had a Justice League Justice Society crossover issue. I got that thing, and immediately the whole Earth-Tooth thing, I was like into it instantly. Dr. Midnight instantly became like my favorite of the group. Later became Green Lantern, but at that time I didn't see the original Green Lantern. But Dr. Midnight, he was the one who jumped out at me right then. And so from that point on, every time I saw him, by the time they started up the new All-Star comics again in the around the mid 70s, I was buying those off the stand. I remember getting some reprints, like I think Derek mentioned about older JSA stories that they would cram in here and there with DC's big thick reprints. But that was my first encounter. It was one of those crossover issues. I don't think it was the one with the Earth S. I think that came later. So I think it was like maybe the year before that. But those yearly crossovers became something I looked forward to every single year. You don't get any of that kind of stuff nowadays. There's just an overload of content out there. But that anticipation of knowing I'm not going to get to see these guys, I mean, I was like Derek. I was that little nerdy kid. I liked the fact that I knew characters other kids didn't know. I can remember being on the playground and taking my red shirt and pulling it down and putting my belt around my red shirt so I could be Dr. Midnight. They're like, who? I'm that nerd, right?
That's great.
Frank?
Well, for me, it came from one of those, and this is something these guys will know, but if you're not from our generation, you won't. It was one of those plastic bags where they jammed all the extra comics from different companies into one thing. Exactly. And it was.
And you could never see the one in the middle.
Right.
Oh no, you learn
right.
how to
Look and see.
That was
you'd figure it out just enough to go like, at least it's a DC book or it's a gold piece. You had to have that.
Right.
In
Damn
this
it,
case,
it's a Casper.
there was a Batman reprint on one side, and on the back side had a gold key comic that I believe, if I remember right, was Dr. Spectre, which was probably enough to get me in.
Yeah.
I love Dr. Spectre, and anything related to that stuff used to get me. And then in the center, there was one of the newish versions of the Justice Society. And that was at the period where it was with Power Girl and the older characters, the Robin was there. And I later found out from, I think it was Howard Chaykin told me that the Power Girl that they were drawing back then, they drew her very busty. They were trying to get her bigger and bigger and bigger each time to see how far they could push it before the censors would say, no, she's too big now. So, this is the stuff you pick up. And around the same time, they came out with a compilation book that was about origins. And I always used to grab the origins because this is pre-Wikipedia. What did I know?
Secret Origins. I forgot about that.
Yeah, those tabloids. The tabloids with the secret origins.
Exactly. And what I did was it had the origin of the JSA in there, and each of them had a little story to tell in there. And that's when we saw the Spectre get his butt whipped by which was the dumbest name for a character, and they still use him. They had the female Red Tornado, who they called the Red Tomato, who became one of the most popular characters later on. Hawkman, who was then my favorite, along with Sandman. Those were my two favorites back then. Hawkman probably more because I was very into the Egyptology thing back then. I wanted to be an Egyptologist, and my parents didn't argue about it until I was old enough to learn what it costs and how you couldn't get a job that way.
Right.
So that was my parents' way. If you want to do it, we're not supporting you. And so I learned about each of these.
They knew it was a pyramid scheme. They knew it was a pyramid scheme.
I wish I was in Shreveport now so I could just punch him for everybody listening to this, but I'm in New Jersey and I can't punch that far. So yeah, that was my first experience, and it was sporadic, but I liked them so much, and the idea of Earth 2 and an older Robin and Huntress was very much in the forefront there. And I followed them until, say, the 80s, when they started putting out more and more reprints of their work, and I started buying it because I think that's when All-Star Squadron was getting big with Roy Thomas, and he was putting out as much stuff as possible. So that was my...
It's interesting when you talk about the reprints, and I think this is something that's possibly unique to our generation. As a kid, we had 3 television channels. In fact, we had a black and white TV when I was a kid. And whatever was on the TV, it didn't matter when the era was, if they were wearing clothes or fashions that weren't what we saw every day. If we liked the story, we liked it. The Dialing for Dollars Theater showed the old Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies, the Universal horror flicks, Shirley Temple, whatever. It's like we liked it. Our textbooks were still Janet and Mark that had kids with crew cuts when, most of us had Beetle bangs. If the story was good, we liked it. And it was the same way with the comics. When we would get those 100-page spectaculars with all the reprints, we'd read the current stuff with the Neil Adams type artwork, but we also loved the Golden Age artwork. And when we were kids, we didn't care. Kids today, it's like, ooh, that's old. Ooh, I don't want that. That's black and white. I don't think that was a big deal to our generation.
And I got to be honest, the Golden Age artwork kind of gave me hope. Like, I wanted to be an artist. And so you look at, like Harry Lampert on, I think that's who was drawing The Flash. It's so angular, it's so square, and certainly Dick Sprang to some extent too. Talk about Batman 66. That was hopeful. And now that I'm a grown-ass man, I look back and I see there were some real masters of comics art working in that time, and some in the simplicity too. Bernard Bailey on the Spectre was pretty damn good, but certainly the Fred Gardenier, and there's a lot of others. But yeah, you are absolutely right. It's a lost experience. My son, would read. I would hand him whatever, So I said at one point when he was little, you know who the Justice Society are. You know about Dr. Fate. And he just looked at me, 7-year-old, dead in the eye. I said, because you're my dad. Nobody else is reading this, Dad.
Yeah. My son, when he was, I'm gonna say 6, he would tell people his favorite Flash was the Jay Garrick Flash, and had an action figure that had come out at that point with the whole helmet and all that, which was very, very nerdy for a 6-year-old at that time, which would have been like around 2001.
But he made it to the CW.
Yeah, so eventually he did. He did. But at that time, that was on nobody's radar.
Well, part of it was that back at our era, we didn't have the Wikipedias. We didn't have anything. Everything was the joy of discovery. You turn on the TV and you see a Victor Mature movie. You might have seen his face before, but you sit back and watch, and you might get a Western. The first movie I ever remember, I actually own it now. Wait a second. I'm going to pull this out if I can. The first movie I ever remember following from beginning to end was a Victor Mature Western. I never forgot it. And then I saw it like a year later because it was on a channel. And I watched it because it was something different. It was so unique. And then you had moments where you started to discover that, hey, this guy was in that. Like, for me, that was a little weirder because I lived across the street from Peter Lorre's brother. And he looked like an older Peter Lorre. And I worked with that one's son, too. So I was watching a movie once, and I saw Peter Lorre on it, and I said, Mommy, why is Mr. Lorre on television? And she passed out laughing because she said, no, that's his brother. He was an actor. And my response was, oh, okay. And then it was done, but it was still, we had a joy of discovery that all of the modern information is taken away from us.
Yeah.
When you walked into a comic store and you saw a character you didn't know, it gave you that thrilling moment where, wow, this is something interesting. This might be something. Or you might have heard somebody at school say, oh, I liked that character, Dr. Midnight or the Hawkman or whatever. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, I heard this.
But let's correct you because you weren't walking into a comic store, right? You were walking into a drugstore. Corner drugstore,
or 7-Eleven.
Spinner rack. You didn't know if you were going to get the name. There's still a World's Finest. I don't know what the second part of the story, what happens. But I've been reassured by people who work at DC. No, don't worry. Superman and Batman won. I'm like, yeah, I pretty much figured that out. But I would say that Justice League of America, sorry, not Justice Society, was the first comic that I really tried to collect and track down in order after that 110. One, because I didn't know they were annual team ups. I was hoping for the next appearance of the Justice Society. And Keith, you mentioned that Earth S one. Like, I loved that every year Len Wein, God rest his soul, started introducing other teams from all over. And when the point they got the Time Trapper and had to do Jonah Hex and Enemy Ace, and they made up a time traveling team just so that they could keep that tradition going. I was like, well, that was so cool. I learned so much about so many.
Loved it. Yeah, and you may remember they had the murder mystery a couple years later in the crossover, right? Where Mr. Terrific gets murdered. Yeah. That was the crossover.
But one of the cool things about that issue was I think that was soon after the Earth 2 Batman died, and there was this cool moment between Earth 1 Bruce Wayne and Helena Wayne.
Yes.
Yeah. Just talking to somebody who's a younger version.
Remind me, I'm still mad at Jeff Johns. I think it was Jeff Johns who had it like one of the crises where the new Mr. Terrific said he didn't believe in ghosts, and I'm like, what? No. The Spectre is literally on your team. There's no argument. There is life after death in the DC universe.
Well, if you're not believing in ghosts, and all of that, and you live in the DC universe, you're either you're crazy and the real crazy person, or you're that Dr. 13 guy who seems to still believe everything is Scooby-Doo, and he's wrong.
But those were wonderful stories because the interplay between the Phantom Stranger and Dr. 13 was just hilarious. The fact that that was a great framing sequence for for them to reprint a Dr. 13 story and then reprint a Phantom Stranger story. It's like, oh yeah, well let me tell you this. Okay, back to JSA. My first memory, I think it was one of the JSA JLA team ups, but one of the things I remember the most about it was they could explain the whole Earth 1, Earth 2 concept in a couple of panels. And this was the thing that I think it was Jeanette Kahn, who was the publisher, who took over as publisher at DC and sort of instigated the crisis on Infinite Earth because she said, nobody can understand that. And personally, I can't remember which I saw first. I don't know if it was the mirror universe of Star Trek or the JSA JLA, but I immediately grasped the concept, and I was just a little kid, and I don't remember which one of those I encountered first. But
I gotta say, Jeanette Kahn gets a bad rap. It really wasn't her. That's been the urban myth.
Oh.
It's that all these writers coming on, because I'm vaguely friends with Marv Wolfman, and I spent an evening at a party one night, and he was talking about some Legion story, and I said, "Oh no, this is what was going on," and blah blah. And he's like, "How do you remember that?" And I said, "You only had to write it once. I read it 20, 30 times, so of course I know the details. But the writers were having trouble keeping track of who." And then you had Bob Haney over in Brave and the Bold, who did not give an F what Earth
Bob Haney
lived
doesn't
on.
care.
No,
Oh, yeah.
the Haneyverse is its own continuity, and
let me
I hope
tell
you do a podcast about Brave and the Bold, because I could talk about that for I love those.
My flight back from Puerto Rico back to the States, one of the comics I had to read was The Brave and the Bold with Wildcat as the guest star, and in my brain, okay, remember I'm 9 years old at that point, I'm going, wait, how is Wildcat on Earth 1? That's what my brain never mentioned, but that was my brain. That's what I'm saying. It's 6 years old, it's 7 years old. I grasped it instantly, Chuck, just like you. It's like, it's not difficult. It's not a hard concept.
For our kids, if you ask a kid to tell you every single transfer evolution of every single Pokemon, as my kid could do, and when they said, it's that they thought they just were going to straighten things out. They couldn't decide editorially, was it a true reboot? Because some stories did, and I, as they've constantly tried to undo it, I think that was, I love the Justice Society, and all of you, I know I've met you in some capacity for pulp in general. Justice Society works great as a 40s and 50s concept. The book that's going on right now, I'm having fun, but they are doing so many twists and turns and backflips to justify why these guys are still around.
Yeah.
One of the new things they're doing that I do like is I like what they're doing with Alan Scott, the Green Arrow.
I love the retcon, if you will, of who he was and what he was going through. Totally love that. I think way overdue. No way would they have done that in 1940, but
right.
But the thing is, it's like I see so many arguments with people saying, "Oh, how could he suddenly become gay?" And it's like people don't know that there are people who elderly people who did hide it all those years, who did have kids, who did get married and have kids, and they were still gay. And
they may have even loved the person they were with. It just wasn't really
so
they
needed. That 6-issue miniseries or 7-issue miniseries that they did last year with Alan Scott was set in 1938, 39, and that's fine. It works. You've got the historical context, and the pressure is much greater because in 2025, in 2022, it was like he could be a little more comfortable. 2025, maybe not, but it's still, he's too old.
Yeah, I mean, because I was introduced to the JSA in the 70s and 80s feel like it works for me because they weren't too old.
Right.
At that point they were older, but they weren't too old. After about the 80s, then every storyline or series, there's got to be something that predicates how and why some of these guys that were active in 1940 are still able to do what they do.
Yeah.
And you can maybe just kind of do a wave your wand kind of a thing and do that. But I feel like they kind of work in blocks. They work in stories told in their prime, stories told in their middle age, and I think and you're able to address different things. That's part of why I like the Lynn Straczewski, Mike Parobeck run because for me that's a really good encapsulation of the middle-aged guys. They're older. They're older through magic. They're not as old as they should be, but they're basically dealing with middle age. I like the whole bit with Green Lantern wearing a hairpiece and stuff like that, and he takes it off. And so, there's stuff like they were embracing their age at that point, and DC backed off and ran from that.
Well, yeah,
very
and
quickly.
and they were struggling as well to pass the legacy on. That's where you had,
That's what it was
partially
working
because of Infinity Incorporated,
Mhm.
right? And because you had Rick Tyler. That's where Al Rothstein was coming up, Atom Smasher, and loved that. But of course, I realized even in the 80s, they were still thinking, and I wish this were true, kids were reading these books in the 80s and 90s, and some are,
Yeah.
but they've moved on, and that's okay. They moved on to other things, but there was a real opportunity to continue telling stories that really resonated with the age group that was reading them. What is that like to, let's be Cars 3, let's be Lightning McQueen deciding to become the mentor, and what is that to step aside?
Right.
And that's
I think there's value to that. Yeah, there's value to that. And that was their unique place in that Silver Age moment and
They
into
could
the
have
Bronze
kept
Age.
a lot of that there if they'd kept a more nebulous time scale like they used to in the 70s. It was sort of the 70s, sort of the 60s, sort of the future, sort of everything. By keeping a nebulous time scale, the JSA as middle-aged fit very well where they were. When you started to get very specific to the time, now you're wondering, okay, the Ian Carcole stealing his energy power kind of thing could last a while, but we're starting to have issues with this where Infinity Incorporated was a good idea if they'd done more crossover to the JSA and kept that as a very vital concept. Instead, they backed off very quickly because they decided to get rid of the JSA for reasons I still.
The thing that I always consider the most, before the crisis, the most awkward thing that was going on, and Green Arrow is my favorite character, but Green Arrow thought he was sleeping with a much older woman, and it turns out he was sleeping with a much younger woman, the Black Canary. Because originally he just assumed that it was the Golden Age Black Canary, and then they did the story where it turns out that she was dying after Larry got killed, and while Superman was transporting her from Earth 2 to Earth 1, it turns out that they had had a daughter that was in suspended animation or something like that.
Yep, exactly.
And I mean, and that almost goes into that really weird, almost obscene, like the Avengers story with Ms. Marvel getting pregnant, and where it's like, oh, and that was one of the reasons I think I was glad that the came along to rectify. Like, okay,
but
it was never.
When we were kids, because that, and when you realize, like, you go to Marvel Colossus and Kitty Pryde, that was not appropriate. But because I was Kitty's age, I was like, oh, it's a soap opera. It was cool, and it didn't. That story, with that storyline with the two Dinahs, I don't remember ever an acknowledgement that, like, oh, Dinah Lance looks really good for a woman who was active fighting crime in the 40s. Like, they never said that. You just accepted everybody at that age. I think it was very shocking to me. It was in Adventure Comics when the Batman of Earth 2 got killed. I'm like, again, an acknowledgement that, oh, there are these older versions. And I think even the Superman of Earth 2, he showed up a lot later in the crossovers than you'd think, right? Like, but of course, that was always the problem with the JSA. Not the problem, but when you're going back and you're like, I want to see Earth 2 Superman fight in those All-Star comics. And I was like, oh no, he was an honorary member because technically behind the scenes it was a different publisher. Right?
Well, and I think also you had the DC editorial or the writer problem in the 70s, which of course I don't understand, but the thinking that Superman was hard to write for because he was too powerful. So if you bring in, and you've got two Supermen, see, that thinking was, well, then what are we going to do? What kind of a threat are we going to have? I'm like, it doesn't have to be an external threat. It doesn't have to be some big monster. You think more creatively as well. I'm like, you can bring these guys in and tell a story. You don't have to sit around and try to think of, well, what thing is so powerful it would require two Supermen, right? But that was kind of the thinking. but that was kind of
they
the
would
big-
always say Earth 2 was weaker. He was a
Yeah,
weaker
yeah.
physically.
He couldn't fly. He leapt, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They put him back to the 1938 level.
Okay.
They wrote
Did
him
anybody
and married to Lois Lane.
Yeah,
Yeah,
They wrote
I
him
remember-
married to
I
Lois
remember the
Lane.
cover.
and he was the editor of the Daily Star. Yeah, that's one of my favorite comics from junior high. Was that
Me
the marriage of
Mr. and Ms.
Superman and
Superman.
Lois Lane? Yeah, great cover. Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, great cover. Yeah,
Okay. Did anybody catch the Stargirl series?
Loved it.
Loved it. Yeah,
It blew my mind how the love and sincerity and just lavish devotion to the golden age. You talked about Dr. Midnight earlier. They really did him justice. That he was like a prominent character talking to his predecessor. I mean, to his protege.
Yeah.
She called him Chuck. There's so much stuff because I read. It was almost like they just took like all the continuity that existed from the comics just could have existed up to a certain point.
They said,
and it was a different version of Infinity.
Don't
Inc.
ask what year that happened.
yes,
right?
exactly.
Because
Yeah,
it was so clear they were still the 40s versions because Stripesy was driving that Star Rocket Racer that was definitely a 1940s sedan, and you're like, okay, but yeah, love that. I couldn't believe, as old guys, we old guys who love comics, we will always say this, like, I can't believe I lived long enough to see a screen accurate Eclipso show up.
Right.
But they actually did Eclipso right, and it's astounding. But I love those kids. I thought that was a terrific usage of them, and I regret that.
I do wish that they had been able to incorporate an actual Starman, Ted Knight, instead of just focusing on Sylvester. But
they implied that he was gonna show up. There were a lot of that original roundtable.
But maybe it was because they got canceled or whatever and had to wrap things up.
Well, they hinted about Jack Knight too. I think if they had been able to continue, they would have brought Jack Knight in.
Yeah.
And Chuck, you never made it out to the West.
Adam Smasher made
in Sherman Oaks. There was an Earth 2 comic shop. My buddy Car D'Angelo just ran it, but he just retired about 9 months ago. But they had the JSA painting from Smallville of them sitting around the round table, and that was in the comic shop. Jeff Johns had been a co-owner at one point, investor, and he gave Car that painting. So it was, again, Smallville was 9 seasons of, it just irritated me. Put on the S. And then in season 10, they gave me what I finally wanted, which was the Justice Society. They showed the JSA as somehow being this secret lost group, and who knows, what time. But if nothing else, that painting promised so much because there's a Spectre in there. There's a Doctor, which I guess Dr. Fate was on Smallville. But all of the classic characters, and going like, what a show that could have been. And Stargirl came close to that. So I was thrilled by that.
That photograph of the 7 Soldiers of Victory gave me goosebumps.
Yeah. So
you
good.
didn't see it, Frank? Frank, did you see it? Are you saying you didn't see it?
No, I saw it. I definitely saw it. I watched the Stargirl originally just to see, because I met Jeff Johns before he got famous, and he told me a story about Stargirl, how he named and created the character based on his late sister who died in an airplane disaster over New York. He made the character so he had an immortal version of his sister forever. And so I tuned in originally for that, but I liked it, and Chuck was raving about it, and that made it another reason to see it. Much as I like to be contrary to Chuck, I had to agree with this. And then they started having it appear, and then Adam Smasher, being played by a WWE wrestler, probably the only one who could have had the physique, even though he didn't have the height, was a great little moment there. I mean, there was a true joy to that. Now, as to Smallville, by the time the JSA came up, I had to be dragged back to it because I had given up. I liked Lex Luthor more than I liked
Mhm.
Superman at that point. Lex Luthor was the actual star of that show for the first few seasons for me.
Yeah.
But I brought back because they were offering this character, and I haven't seen the current run of the show of Superman, but they did bring him back as Clark Kent in a scene with John Cryer.
Are you
as
talking
Lex
about when they did Crisis?
Yeah,
Is it
that's when
when
they
they
did
did
the
their
Crisis
Crisis, yeah.
crossover.
Yeah, I don't watch that show, but I was willing to watch it just for him. And I got to say, he looked like an older Superman. I had to
Yeah,
give them credit. The guy
Yep,
kept
he
in
did.
shape and he looked good. And he did have that great line about Lex Luthor. I didn't know the president was in town. That was a
Yeah.
great little scene there.
Crisis was I love their version of Crisis, but that was like right after that COVID hit, and
Mhm.
they couldn't do any more crossovers after that, and the writing, everything went down. It became hard to watch. The Flash, which I had loved, and I am one of the easiest marks. So many things I rarely complain about it. I've tried to adopt the philosophy is if I don't like something, I won't talk about it, but. Uh, it was really hard to watch a lot of those shows after Crisis because I think it's because I had my hopes up when they did that
Yeah.
last bit around the table and actually played the Super Friends theme song. I was like, oh boy, this is just going to be great. And then,
Then
you
they
know,
couldn't do it. They couldn't.
yeah,
Yeah,
pull it off.
it kind of
Right.
peaked with the Crisis, and it never caught back up. Although the Superman and Lois show was really good, but it kind of operated in its own little mini universe on its own.
but Stargirl. I mean,
Stargirl was good.
when they brought in John Wesley Shipp as Jay Garrick.
That was great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Perfect. It's perfect.
And then they brought in Johnny Thunder.
Yeah.
And it was an actor I'm not that familiar with, but I mean, he had the bow tie, everything. It was just, and it was a great cast. The adults and the kids. Was it Owen Wilson as Stripes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The way.
Yeah,
way
that show was
he,
a love letter to the JSA all the way
he
through.
committed. Owen Wilson committed. He never once did his face like have that. I'm getting a paycheck.
No,
doing
he
this-
was sincere. Everybody
He
was.
committed-
I mean,
No, he was there for it. Yeah. Yeah, he was there for it.
And even when they brought Jay Garrick back in, of course, with John Wesley Shipp, they didn't hide anything. He wore the uniform and he wore the Mercury helmet. That was the one concern I had when I heard he was going to be in as Jay Garrick is there might, it's too cool to have that, but there he was, Mercury helmet and all. I mean, that show, Jeff Johns has a genuine love for this stuff. That's why he kept bringing back JSA over the years too, because he loves the concept and he loves the characters, and because he has such high power now in DC, he's able to do these things. So there's no too cool for
the
school in
costume.
this.
When they had the authentic costumes on Power Girl, when Dr. Midnight was wearing a completely comic book accurate costume, and his protege wore the same costume, Hourman. Oh my God! It was a comic book accurate Hourman costume. I could not believe it.
I have a great moment. When I was watching it, and when Dr. Fate appeared on the screen, my late wife was walking through the room. She didn't indulge me too much with this stuff. She looked at the screen and said, "How is he not suffocating in that?" And I said, "We've been asking that question since the 40s. Just get over it." She just said, "This is what you did. I can't deal with this." I walked out of the room. But yeah, how is he not suffocating in that?
And many people saw it, but the implication was that if Constantine, the series, had continued past the 6 episodes, he had Dr. Fate's helmet.
I remember.
And so that was going to, and the Spectre appeared.
Yep.
Jim Corrigan appeared, and there was a future vision of him as the Spectre. And like that show would have led into a Justice Society, or at least the mystical members of the Justice Society.
And they even were able to cross over that show with Lucifer. And that seriously
That was so
impressed me,
great.
because that guy who played Lucifer, my Lord, was he good.
Yeah.
I wasn't a fan of the comic, but my God, was that show fun?
I feel like the Spectre could be could be very well adapted into a very hard-hitting television series if they would just tackle it, and it would
do it like a Tales from the Crypt kind of thing.
Well, I'm even thinking like almost like a horror themed procedural with Jim Corrigan investigating and the Spectre, doing justice.
Are you talking about doing like actually some of the Michael Fleischer?
Michael Fleischer,
turn a guy into a wooden statue and throw him in the wood chipper.
In the criminal justice system, there are two portions. There's law. There are the police that track down the evildoers, and then there is the Spectre. Boom, boom.
They did that animated short with the Spectre that was based on the Fleischer.
That was terrific.
And that to me was proof of concept. That's how you do it. And I think it would work if you don't try to shy away from it. And I think there's a lot within the JSA that could be mined for that kind of thing and be very, very popular. They kind of almost did it with Hawkman and Dr. Fate in that Black Adam movie, but they were buried in a movie that people didn't want to see.
The best thing about
they were buried in a movie because part of the problem with that movie was egos had taken over.
Yeah, but Pierce Brosnan, as Dr. Fate was actually perfect, and
Hawkman was great.
Well, but Pierce Brosnan owned every second he was on the screen. It was like there was such a bold difference that you could see between The Rock, who was begging for attention, and Pierce Brosnan, who just naturally got it. It's like he just walks on the screen, and he was Dr. Fate, and even when he didn't have the mask on, he was Dr. Fate.
Absolutely.
And it's like they nailed that, and it was just too small of a part for the big production. And it was
was not just him though. It was every person who played the part right. Henry Cavill was phoned in.
Oh,
and he looked tougher, better, and more interesting than The Rock in 30 seconds?
Yeah.
And, I mean, The Rock has some positive characteristics to him in terms of that, but they should have just sat him down and said, look, Dwayne, you're a great wrestler. You got a good look for camera, and you're not a bad actor either, because he's not. But you got to learn to respect the fact that you're going to lose occasionally. Right. Get over it now, because this is DC and everybody loses.
I trust James Gunn. I think if anybody can promote, could do the Spectre TV series you want, it's James Gunn.
I agree.
I agree. I love everything. Everything he's done has been great, and I think he loves comics. He as opposed to who was the guy that was who did the Justice League.
Snyder.
Snyder just read Dark Knight, and that's it.
He loved. I don't. It's easy to bash on Snyder, and I will do that sometimes too. But he does love comics. He just interpreted it a different way. I mean, you go to as many cons as I do, you find plenty of fans that absolutely see Zack Snyder. I've met comic book store owners who are like, no, Superman makes no sense. They all come from a Lex Luthor side. They're like, if I had that kind of power, I'd be just shutting everybody down so they would stop bugging me.
And it tells you about them more than
and that's the problem is Zack Snyder, who is also unfortunately, going through a very tragic time in his life. But at that time, but he still, he was creating a Wagnerian opera. Because if you watch, and not that I recommend it because because it's having to watch it a second time, the Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice extended edition, just as watching his 4-hour or however way too long his Justice League was, they are better stories, longer, and they're still so uncompromising in a vision of that's not my heroism. That's not why I got into DC.
Yeah,
part of the problem with Snyder is he took the lessons of Alan Moore of deconstructionism, but Alan Moore even says you got to get past that too. Hence, he wrote Supreme, which was the ultimate love letter to the Silver Age Superman. You know, you can't, you can destroy to a point, but like Johnny Rotten even says, punk rock now has rules, which is the opposite of why I went into it. So you have to go past your own ego of Batman has to be the best, the best, the best at this, the best at that, the best planner, the best. You got to move on and try to enjoy. Go into it from a point of view of love and passion, and you'll see that. Where you see that in Stargirl, you saw the passion and love. You saw that in, let's just take James Gunn, Guardians of the Galaxy, a movie that only us, little group like us, would know who the characters are. But I saw it on a Friday, and that Saturday I turned to my wife and I said, we're seeing it. She said, you saw it yesterday. I said, this is the movie for you. And she sat down, and that was her favorite comic movie to the end, because she walked out of there saying, besides the comedy and the good acting and the music, whoever made that movie loved it. They loved what they did. And we saw that with early JSA. We see it with Jeff Johns, but we got to get past the deconstruction.
Well, the thing that to me, James Gunn's greatest contribution to superhero cinema is we went from that Fantastic Four movie where they thought Galactus would be too silly, so they made him a big space cloud. And James Gunn said, no, screw that. We're going to have a talking raccoon. Okay, if you can't accept it, then you don't understand the genre.
But I do want to acknowledge, look, that by the time they got James Gunn in there, Disney owned Marvel. And if you're going to tell me that making a super team that involves a raccoon and a tree, when Disney had done that in Pocahontas, know that some Disney executive looked at the list of things they were developing and said, ooh, we can make toys of that. Disney had no fear for that show.
But no,
it's a part of it. But let me say,
James Gunn knew how to do it.
Let me say how this ties to the JSA discussion. I think is actually pretty pertinent, because James Gunn's going to be incorporating JSA characters. It's very clear, right? And so and when you're talking Zack Snyder and his approach, it's Zack Snyder. Yes, I would say they are both comic book fans. I'm not going to take that away from Zack Snyder. The difference is James Gunn actually understands characters, and Zack Snyder knows archetypes. He doesn't really know the characters. He sees the visuals, and he's absorbed in the visuals, but he's extraordinarily shallow in his approach. If you go back and you do watch his Batman v Superman and Justice League, the things that bring depth to those movies at all are brought by the actors themselves, not by the story itself, and not by the visuals. Casting. Right? And so the actors are working with a bare minimum, and they're giving you something that's not even really there. It's like they give the depth that Zack Snyder himself doesn't seem to grasp. James Gunn, on the other hand, gives a setting for the actors and for everybody that stems from him, of a love for comics and superheroes in general. He's not trying to tell grand myths of the Olympic gods. He's telling stories about humanity and love and family and friendship, and he's using superheroes to tell that. And and it's that love that I think that Chuck is talking about. There's a joy to the movies that he's doing, and that's perfect for the Justice Society of America characters, because that's the thing about them. They come from a simpler time, conceived from a simpler time. And I think that's part of what gives them a universal appeal, if you're willing to embrace that. It's when they start trying to deconstruct them, I think that's where it starts to disconnect with people.
And Frank brought up, the original Ma Hunkel, the Red Tornado, which, boy, was I startled to discover that there was a Golden Age version after seeing Frank Smith or John Smith.
And I believe she was mentioned in Stargirl.
She was. And so the JSA could encompass her, and could have Johnny Thunder, Thunderbolt. I loved that Jim Gaffigan voiced Thunderbolt for a season on Stargirl.
That was great.
Because that was the right attitude. And,
Yep.
James Gunn, so my hope, not just that he got Mr. Terrific in there, but that he chose Guy Gardner for Superman as kind of the silliest. It will only get sillier if Gnort shows up in the Green Lantern series.
I 100% expect Gnort to show up, not on the Lanterns, but in Superman.
Yeah.
I think he gets a cameo.
But
I want Ambush Bug.
Oh, please!
Oh,
I
God,
just
yes.
had that conversation with everybody I run into from DC, so I keep hoping. But it is. I mean, if and when he gets around to an actual Justice Society, figures out how that plays. I think we're going to see them show up in different ways, like Creature Commandos. Kind of acknowledge. I mean, the fact that he went for Creature Commandos, which is the weirdest.
Right.
Concept, and that was a damn good animated series. But he made Peacemaker viable, and I've had people come to me and say, like, "Well, what Peacemaker comic should I read?" And say, "There are none that will satisfy you." So it was just he made Peacemaker seem cool, So
yeah, and he made Vigilante seem silly. So hey.
But give me Greg Saunders.
Ambush
Give me
Bug
Greg
comic.
Saunders. Give me that original one.
Well, it did not bother me, the whole vigilante thing, because I always thought that was I love Marv Wolfman, but I always thought that was one of his. There wasn't a lot of thought. It was the Punisher.
It was the Punisher, yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of originality there. So I thought James Gunn's take on the vigilante.
It's hilarious. Yes.
Yeah, make him as insane as possible because it was. There was an Ambush Bug comic by Keith Giffen where he had him meet up with the League of Substitute Heroes.
Substitute Heroes, yeah.
Oh, yes.
It was, without a doubt, one of the funniest comics I have ever read because Ambush Bug, caught in the 24th century, steals a car and is driving around in the air singing Wahoo. And he meets Infectious Lass, and there's a line in it that I've saved since then. I've not read it since I first saw it, where he's talking to Infectious Lass, who makes you get a disease. And he says to her, because she's got like bug features, and he tries to seduce her and says, "And what do you do?" And she says, "I make people sick." And he says, "Well, you certainly do." And then he disappears.
Did anybody see the Brave and the Bold episode? It was the last episode where Henry Winkler did the voice for Ambush Bug.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, and going back to the JSA. Oh, if you can find it, it's the last episode.
I own them.
Paul Rubens as Batmite.
Yeah, I remember that.
And but also going back to the JSA, it's like I wanted to see more of Henry Winkler as Al Pratt. Because he
that's right.
Yeah,
I forgot about that.
And I was like,
Vigilante had a great appearance on that one too. He sang a song at the beginning about Batman in the opening vignette where
it's like a singing cowboy.
Cowboy with the gun in the guitar. But they played it up, and it was first, the song was really cool because it really was a love letter to Batman and the Brave and the Bold. Vigilante was probably one of the coolest he ever came off in that one, even though it was pretty good in the Justice League cartoon.
You know, the voice?
Maurice March, wasn't it?
No.
Maurice, no? I thought.
No. In Brave and the Bold? No. It was Guy Gardner.
Nathan Fillion?
Nathan Fillion. Yeah.
He did that in Justice League Unlimited. I didn't know he did it in Brave and the Bold.
He did it in Brave and the Bold too. He sang the song and everything.
Actually, Justice League had him partnered a lot with the Shining Knight, another Golden Age character that would be pretty much forgotten, but they had a great appearance where they were actually arguing over TV shows that they wanted to watch, and he was telling him after the Knight got injured, he says, "Don't worry, we'll be watching cowboy movies soon again together. Don't worry." As they load him into the ambulance. I love that love of the art, of the characters, of that. And JSA, has that when it's done right. When it's done wrong, like the death of the Justice Society, when they became part of the Ragnarok,
Right.
it was just
Right, yeah.
that upset me a lot. I didn't like that.
Well, that's just part of, we don't want to see old people around us because it makes us think of death, and as we're all finding out now. When there have been times when I went to a protest last year, and there was a couple of us older people, and the younger people there. We all were there for the same cause, but we tried to talk to them, but they would ignore us. Because they were. It was protesting the new laws they were putting in against trans kids.
Right.
And there were a lot of young people there. We were there to fight for them, but it was like we were invisible. And I think that's one of the reasons they got rid of the Justice Society, because they didn't know how to deal with old people.
Well, America doesn't. I mean,
Yeah.
that's because government notwithstanding, that in general we just pretend that death doesn't happen.
Right.
And that's why I think that things like when Batman in Earth 2 Batman died in the 1980, that was a shocker for me, but I thought, no, that makes sense. I mean, people do. And stop lying to each other. I think one of the worst things, just not to bash on Jeff Johns, because I love Jeff Johns' work, but the fact that he wouldn't let go of Hal Jordan and Barry Allen when Barry's death was a sacrifice that meant something. I didn't need Barry Allen back, and I think DC fumbles all the time now trying to figure out, where does Barry sit with Wally, and which Wally now, and where does Jay fit, and and Hal Jordan, he had some redemption as the Spectre. It didn't quite work for me, but they tried something, and then they should have just let it go and let Kyle step up.
Mm-hmm. And by the time they brought him back, I mean, they had Kyle in a better costume, they had him better positioned and all that. I mean, I think they were working. I think the characters are working, but at some point, and I don't know who made the decision. I don't know if it was Dan Didio's idea or Jeff's idea. I don't know whose it was, but even though the characters were going, Wally West was going good. Kyle was in a good place, but there was an editorial fiat. We're going back. We're bringing back Barry. We're bringing back Kyle.
I think it was Jeff, but I don't know, because again, I know plenty of people at DC, and some are Team Jeff Johns and some are Team Dan DiDio, and depending on who you ask, whichever one they like. Oh, it was the other guys.
Okay, well, this is where I'm gonna have a difference, and in fact, I remember having a very interesting conversation with Keith. I think it was at the last Pulp Fest, about why he thought it was wrong to bring Spock back. How it you told me how that kind of
because it undercut Captain Kirk's entire story arc from Wrath of Khan. I mean, not that I hate having Spock back, but every character growth moment that he had and where they left him at the end of Star Trek 2 is completely unwound in the course of Star Trek 3. That's what we were having a conversation
about. See, here's where I have a disagreement. This is one of the reasons why I like comic books and fantasy universes like that, is because you can live through the grieving with the characters who lost them and then get them back later. And I've always been good with that. I've always been good with returns, because in life you don't get that. And it's like I've lost, too many people that I love, and we all have. And it's like, it's nice to think that there's, that it doesn't have to be that way in a fictional world.
But in a perfect world, fictionally, for me, in that specific context, I think I would have felt better about it had it been at least 2 more movies down the line, that there could have been some more Kirk moved on,
right?
And that way, then when the return would happen, it would. For me, it would have been more effective that way.
Well, sadly, back then we didn't have like we have now with Disney Plus and stuff like this.
Yeah, there was no guarantee that they were going to have another movie, so
we could have just had, like they did Picard. We could have had, and a series takes place in between the Wrath of Khan and the Search for Spock. We could have had like a 6-episode season of just Kirk farting around on,
Well,
without-
and Keith, I mean, the thing too was that Leonard Nimoy was done.
Well,
And
yeah,
then they went to the
exactly.
premiere of
Right.
Wrath of Khan, and he walked up to Harv Bennett and said,
Yeah.
"So, how are you bringing me back?"
Right.
And it was
yeah.
like, "What? No,
Well,
you said you were done."
And let me just say, as a comic book fan, and I know we're digressing from JSA, but on that topic, as a comic fan, if you were reading the DC Comics Star Trek series, it was set in the continuity of the Star Trek movies at that time, and so Mike W. Barr was writing that what I'm talking about. The year or so of comics between Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3 tell that story of Kirk going on, and then they just had to make sure they reset it back so they would fit the continuity
and that was
at the
always
time
the
of Star Trek
problem.
3. But but they did. They had him have that experience that people who only watched the movies did not get. It's also why I always enjoyed reading the novelizations, because they would give you a little bit more.
Oh yeah.
About that kind of stuff too. But that's just me being me.
Well, Chuck, I'd say it's less than like in Final Crisis. There was Martian Manhunter died in that one. I think that's the only time he's died and come back. But at his funeral, they were all saying, "Well, until Resurrection Day." And I think a new superhero, I can't remember who, was like going, "What? What do you mean?" He's, "Oh yeah, no, he's coming back." And so I'm with you. It's like, here I am, someone who loves, Philip Jose Farmer's work, because the implication was that Doc Savage and Tarzan were going to live forever. I'm fine with that, and I do love that, but that is fantasy. I just want, if someone pointed out to me recently that like kids coming into Marvel right now do not know, if they are coming into Marvel, they don't know that Bucky was ever dead.
Right.
And that Bucky was like, that was Bucky's death was the character arc for Captain America. That was his guilt for like 30 years, 40 years. And then Ed Brubaker figured out, oh yeah, nobody ever actually showed him die, and created the Winter Soldier. So we went through all that, but kids don't now. So I think, that also may be a difference. There were still some immutable deaths.
You remember the term Bucky death? You mean,
Bucky
is he
dead?
dead or is he Bucky dead?
Somebody
Uncle
asked me
Ben
about,
dead.
like, well, at least Uncle Ben's still dead. And I said,
is he though?
you can read it. There's a Spider-Verse. There's a version where he's the one, and Ultimate, so Bucky dead. I agree there. I don't know.
I actually had a moment about that where I predicted that Mastermind was going to come back after, a bunch of years after he'd been mind messed up by Jean Grey after the Hellfire Club. And my friend said, no, he's gone. He'll never be back. And I looked at my friend and I said, in Marvel, everybody can come back except Bucky. He always stays dead. And now I'm even wrong about that.
Yeah.
It's like,
but I look at that Superman trailer.
Is Bloodstone.
To go back to
Bloodstone,
the original, and that Elsa is, the Immortal has never come back. But James Gunn, when I see that scene in the Superman trailer where he's sitting on the front porch in Kansas with his dad, I tear up, because I'm like, no, I never know which reality we're in. Is this a one where Jonathan Kent died and that was very crucial? I love that John Byrne kept him alive, because it killed me watching that movie in '78 when Glenn Ford went, oh no, it just died so randomly. I'm like, I get why. It's all my powers and I couldn't save him, but it's still, and Zack Snyder didn't get that either, because no way was Jonathan Kent going to say, I can think of a dozen ways that Clark could have saved him without anybody knowing.
Yep.
It's a hurricane, tornado. Weird things happen in tornadoes.
Yeah.
When he's walking towards the car, the second time I saw it, all I could do is I remembered one of the early spoofs of Star Wars called Hardware Wars, where Obi-Wan Kenobi is like, it's like, come on, Obi-Wan, come with us. No, you guys go on without me. I'll be okay. And they're all like, oh, what a martyr. Who needs you, you martyr? Yeah. And that's what I was thinking when I was watching Paul Kent walking towards the tornado. Oh,
And
who
I
needs
think
you,
that is
martyr?
on YouTube. So people look up Hardware Wars by Ernie Fasalius. 20th Century Foss, I remember was his company.
The Wookiee monster. They have a cookie
And
monster.
ham
as Chewbacca.
salad.
Ham salad. Princess Leia actually has honey buns on the side of her head.
The side of her head. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. It's we're reaching the hour mark, and I wanted to keep it down to an hour. This has been a great conversation. Let's go around and get any plugs. Derek, what's coming up next on Fanboy Planet that you know of?
Depending on when this goes live, I've got an interview with the creators of Popeye the Slayer Man coming up next week.
Boy.
And I will hopefully be able to announce officially the title of I will be getting back into writing comics myself, which I hope the closer I get to retirement, that's the beautiful thing about comics, that I want to get back into, because I have written some. I wrote the Greatest American Hero comic adaptation several years ago.
Look at what's happening to you. I can't believe it
myself. No. Suddenly I'm up on top of the world. I know. Yeah. And yeah. Anyway, so that there's always something happening at Fanboy Planet, because we got WonderCon coming up too. And I know, our mutual friend, Chris Carey who I just interviewed on Fanboy Planet, just said, see you there, right? I'm going to see you there. Yes, Chris, I will walk by. I promise. And I will say, I have everything. I can't buy anything more from you. I keep buying it, but so a lot of stuff happening. Some I just can't talk about.
Keith, are you still doing the movie podcast?
No, we have had a parting of ways.
Okay.
But I am going to be on the Part-Time Fanboy podcast tomorrow, talking about Howard the Duck, the movie. So that should be fun.
I know Part-Time Fanboy. He lives down the street from me.
Yes, so, Christian is a longtime friend of mine, and so I'm going to be on there. We'll be talking about Howard the Duck. Well, we have a few books from Meteor House coming out this summer. One of which I've done the cover illustration for, and an interior illustration for. I don't know if they want the title out here yet, so I'm not going to mention the title. So just keep an eye out for it. But I do know they have mentioned Time's Last Gift, which I helped, obviously do the design. Bob Eggleton did the art. So Time's Last Gift is coming out in a nice, beautiful Meteor Press hardcover and softcover edition.
Awesome. Frank?
Well, I have a mystery novel that's going to be coming out sometime in the next few months from Belanger Books. It's an original adventure set in 1750 England, with the Hellfire Club as actual members of the story in the realistic historical version of the characters. So you get to meet the fourth Earl of Sandwich, who was so famous or infamous, Francis Dashwood, and other characters of the period. And I'm working on the sequel. I'm also working on a story I started while Gail was in the hospital that is totally outside of my comfort zone. It's a story about a character who is actually a cleaner who gets basically dragged into like the early equivalents of the KGB, and he's literally stays a cleaner through it, but he gets to experience these events of the Great Purge, of the characters of the period, and all from this point of view of this very simple character who just believes that he should never really. He always is thinking the nail that's sticks out of the wood will get hammered down, so he wants to stay below the surface. I don't know why I started something like that while she was in the hospital, but I also started the other one in 1750 while she was in the hospital, and my brain was going everywhere. So those are the two that are coming. I have a couple of more from different places, but I don't know when they're coming out. And I have to figure out if I'm going to have who's going to publish my Machiste novel.
Oh, based on the old Sword and Sandal films?
Oh, sure, exactly that character.
Okay.
I wrote him. I wrote him exactly like those old Ed Fury, Reg Park kind of things.
Oh, man.
I did not even vary the formula in the slightest, complete with evil characters. And Machiste getting caught in a net. He always got caught in nets. I don't know why. He could lift. He could lift a pyramid, but a net that beat him.
Okay, Frank, I'm going to have you on for another episode where we just talk about Sword and Sandal films. Frank and I were on an episode of Pulp Crazy where we talked about Tokusatsu, Ultraman and stuff like that, and that was a lot.
Well, you see, I got Ultraman behind me.
Oh yeah, okay. At the last Pulp Fest that I was at, Jim Beard and I got into a long conversation about Ultraman. Speaking of which, the last episode, this episode is going to be released in April. That's why it's part of JS April. But the episode that was just released of the Earth 2 podcast, we did the whole episode where Elliot S. Magan and Carrie Bates, and Jim Beard does the voice for the Earth 2 Robin.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I do
see
Green Arrow. They got Elliot S. Magan to come on and do the voice of God.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he doesn't play. It's two Scottish guys playing Elliot S. Magan and Carrie Bates, but they got Elliot S. Magan to come in and do the voice of God. So
that's fun.
If you get a chance to listen to it, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Cool.
Earth 2 podcast. All right, guys, this has been we got a lot of philosophical discussions and just talking about the sheer childish joy of comic books, of superheroes. And it's a pleasure talking with you guys. I'm hoping to have each of y'all on at future episodes.
Sure,
and it's been an honor, guys.
Thank you.
I've never met you in person, Derek, but I hope to someday. And I've hung out with Frank and Keith many times.
We've entertained many people when we're together.
All right, guys. Y'all have a good weekend. This episode will be coming out in April. And I appreciate y'all.
Appreciate you, Chuck.
So much.
All right.
Thank
See
you
you
for having me.
later.